Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for today's webinar. We're going to be starting in just about 1 minute as we're still getting a steady stream of people coming in. So we'll talk to you very soon. All right, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Minding the Gaps, Upskilling the Humans of DevOps. I'm just going to let everyone know a few things up top before we get started. One, we're recording this. Should you need to leave or you have a colleague who's unable to join, you will be able to view this later. You can ask questions as we go. We ask that as soon as you think of one, please put it right into the questions panel. We may not have time to do them on the air, but we will be able to get them all out offline in a blog post later on. So please, as soon as you think of one, go right ahead and ask it. On top of that, there's a very short survey at the very, very end when I close this out, just asking what you thought and what you'd like to learn more about in the future. For now, I don't want to take up too much more time. We have a lot of content to get through. So to kick us off, I'd like to introduce Sam Fell from CloudBees. Sam.
Wonderful. Thank you, Max. Hi, everybody. I really appreciate you joining us today to talk about something that I think is important to all of us, everyone out there, is human beings, right? Everybody talks quite a bit about DevOps and continuous delivery and AI and ML and automation. And behind all of those things are people who help to make them happen. Can I go to the next slide, please? So today's topic is this survey that both CloudBees and Electric Cloud, company that CloudBees acquired back in April to help with their application release orchestration solution. We sponsored a survey last year with Jayne Groll, who I'll be introducing in just a second, at the DevOps Institute, called Upskilling the Enterprise DevOps Skills Survey. The results to that were in. We've done a webinar both at Electric Cloud and at CloudBees to talk about those survey results. We've had a chance to digest those results. Jayne, you've probably spoken about these results in a lot of different places. I know you did your entire APAC tour, a lot of different conferences where you've talked about these really, really interesting results. It's the first kind of survey of its kind, and I understand that there might be another survey coming. I'm excited to hear more about that. But we've got some interesting panelists today to talk a little bit about things that are adjacent to this topic. Things like the skills that hiring managers are really looking for, the ways that candidates can take their initiative to upskill themselves and help stand out from the crowd, and some strategies that organizations or companies can follow to help make themselves more attractive to job seekers. Next slide, please. So I have a fantastic panel of people who I've already mentioned. Jayne Groll is the CEO of DevOps Institute. Jayne, welcome to the program. Can you introduce yourself? Give a little background.
Sure. Hi, Sam. Hi, everyone. And I'm really excited to be on this panel. There's some amazing thought leaders, and more importantly, I think a really wide perspective of what upskilling really means in the real world. So I'm Jayne Groll. I'm CEO of the DevOps Institute. We are a member-based open community around emerging DevOps practices. And as Sam mentioned, we fielded this survey and report last year because we believe that there is some information and data that has not yet been really mined in terms of what are the skills, right? We want people to upskill, but we need to help them understand which skills are considered important, maybe nice to have, and not so important. So delighted to be here.
Wonderful, Jayne. Good to see you. Thanks for being here. Next on my list here is Sacha Labourey. Sacha is the CEO of CloudBees. Sacha, say hello. Tell the folks a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Sam. Very happy to be here. I'm CEO at CloudBees, co-founder, and I'm used to say that I was born in open source and grew up in the cloud. I was back in the days at JBoss and then Red Hat, and then co-founded CloudBees with some of my friends. So very happy to be here and talk about human beings.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Somebody who is a familiar face to me and probably to a lot of you out there as well, Topo Paul from CapitalOne. Introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. So first of all, I'm a human being, and that's why I am here. Second, I'm a senior distinguished engineer at CapitalOne. I have been along with CapitalOne's DevOps journey over the last many years, 6 or 7 years, and I'm still in it. And I don't think that I'll ever be done, because this area is so exciting and new things that we see every day. So my main goal is around the individual contributionship within CapitalOne, how to grow that community, how to mentor people into that, and above all, how I can myself as an individual contributor keep track of things that are going on around me.
Wonderful. And I'm going to make a little side note, is every once in a while you're going to see most of the panelists raise their arms up in solidarity with Topo, who is in a room with an automatic light shutter offer if there's no motion. A motion sensor, I guess, is the correct term, not a light shutter offer. So Topo, welcome. Thanks for being here. Glad to see you.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least is a very, very different perspective for us on this call. We're very happy to have Mr. Paul Flaharty, District President from Robert Half. Paul, tell a little bit about yourself, and if you would, take 2 seconds to talk a little bit about Robert Half and the services that you provide.
Sure, of course. And thanks, Sam. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel. And, I thought the topic was particularly relevant for Robert Half and our business. So my role at Robert Half is I oversee our technology staffing operations for the Bay Area market and for Los Angeles. And, one topic that we spend hours discussing in all of the markets that I oversee is how do we find a way to help bridge the gap for our customers who are seeking just a plethora of DevOps resources that just don't seem to have access to the humans. And so, today I'm sitting in the San Jose market. I did a quick statistical analysis, which said that there was 45,000 jobs for quote unquote DevOps engineers or related titles in San Jose, and a grand total of 1,500 available candidates that have that background. And so, I think when we're having a conversation about the humans of DevOps, what I can share my experience and the experience of the team is, how are we recommending that our customers go about finding these humans in creative and unique and outside the box ways, because those statistics clearly indicate that those people are not readily available in a market like this with record low unemployment.
It's amazing. These skills are hot, and if you got them, that's great. And if you want them, it's tough. Hopefully I'm not letting anything out of the bag, and maybe this will help. But Paul, when we were first starting this motion, I actually went to your website and you had listed a senior release engineer. I believe the price tag on that senior release engineer was $160,000. So this is a problem that even Robert Half has trouble trying to find people to do jobs that we're all sort of familiar with and that we're all talking about, is this release process and this getting software out. So I think this is going to be a great conversation. I'm going to, if I could ask you, Max, to go to the next slide. I'm actually going to hand it over to Jayne to talk a little bit about the survey work that she and Evelyn Orlick, who is an ex-Forrester analyst, and she's the primary research director for the DevOps Institute, this work that they did last year with the Enterprise DevOps Skills Report survey. Jayne?
So thanks everyone. And, and I said, I really appreciate the fact that we have a really kind of wide perspective on this. So a little bit of history, DevOps Institute, because we spend a lot of time with the humans at DevOps. And by the way, we use the word human because we're all human, right? And Topo, I love the fact that you said your first, as part of your introduction, is that you're a human, right? And we also know that there is a lot of good IT talent out there that's trying to figure out how they upskill. And there are organizations that are actively investing in upskilling their existing talent, but they're not sure which direction to go. And, DevOps is so broad. I like to think of it as new IT. So whether you're a software engineer, an infrastructure engineer, or anywhere in between pre or post production, you are a DevOps professional. So part of the reasoning behind working with Evelyn on this survey was to try to identify what skills, right? So, we know that automation skills, technical skills are important, but what about other skills? And how do we create sort of an understanding so humans can start plotting their learning journeys? A couple of interesting takeaways came away. As you can imagine, automation skills came in statistically very, very high. We talk about DevOps engineers, despite the fact we don't have an agreed definition of what a DevOps engineer is or isn't. Automation came up high, but statistically, process and softer human skills came out equal. And that was really fascinating to us. I mean, we knew that they were important, but of the 1,600 global respondents to the survey, what we didn't expect is that across the different types of skills, automation, process, and soft skills came out statistically equal. So that was our first takeaway, right? We understood that automation made DevOps a success, but the survey also demonstrated that you need intelligent processes to make automation a success. So there's a very strong codependency there. We need people to focus on their soft skills. We're now using the term human skills. So how to be a better problem solver, how to be a better collaborator, how to be a systems thinker, which is not necessarily encapsulated in existing training or existing knowledge sharing, right? It isn't something that's necessarily organic. And that became important because soft and technical skills came out pretty equal. The other interesting thing of the respondents is half self-identified as operations and half self-identified as development. So that was really also very, very interesting because we didn't guide them in terms of how to identify themselves. But IT operations and security came up as the key functional skills across all of the respondents. But software development lifecycle came out as the #1 process skill across all. So what's the message there? Operations needs to understand SDLC, and software engineers need to understand operations and infrastructure. Business skills seem to be the most important to leaders. And we also found out that vertical skills, while important to certain industries, did not necessarily rise up as being a critical skill. Hiring from within, absolutely the most predominant thinking, right? Let's upskill our existing staff. And then let's look where the talent gaps are from there as well. So again, the report is very deep. It's 48 pages. Anyone's welcome to go to the DevOps Institute site and download it. We're going to do it again this year. I'll talk about that at the end. But again, there were some really, really interesting takeaways. Let me add one more thing. Well, IT is very framework focused. The critical thinking skills, systems thinking skills, security skills rose above those that were mapped to a specific framework. So while they're important, project management, ITIL, Scrum, things like that, they're important. They weren't in the upper half of the process skills. It was the critical human thinking skills that came out as must-have, and then could be married down to specific frameworks or guidance or things like that.
Interesting. Yeah, as long as you've got human capacity to synthesize and project and forward integrate, then whatever Scrum, Agile, whatever methodology you choose is going to be helpful to you.
It'll support it, but it isn't the only path.
Exactly. Max, can we go to the next slide, please? Awesome. And so let's get into the meat of it. Thank you, Jayne, for that high-level sort of background on the survey work that you guys have done. We're excited to see that happen again. Perspective in this conversation really matters. And I think that that's one of the things that makes this such an interesting conversation is the broad perspective from the different cohorts that we have on the panel today. Taking a look at these different skills, which Jayne sort of just talked about, it's interesting to see how the different groups, whether you're in the C-suite, whether you're in management, or whether you're an individual contributor, which types of skills you believed were sort of the most important and the most relevant to you being able to be successful and being able to be a good DevOps human, if you will. So Jayne, you want to comment a little bit on this slide, and then I'm going to open it up to the rest of the panelists for them to give a little bit of an opinion on what they're seeing here and what they can do to help these folks.
So, as the report name indicates, this was enterprise, right? So of the 1,600 respondents, about 61% identified themselves as coming from organizations over 500 employees. So I think when we start to look at kind of the breakdown of who responded, that's important. The C-suite was very clearly identified within the respondents, and management was considered anyone above manager up to, say, vice president or director, and then individual contributor, again, they all self-identified that way. And so we tried to analyze where were the similarities and where were the differences between, say, the perception of what the CIO wants versus the perception of what maybe the individual contributor thinks they need to develop. And of course, management, we think of management as the hiring stack, right? They're going to be the tier that's absolutely going to be the ones making the decision, Paul, on who's going to be hired and who's not. You know, their perspective is certainly very important as well.
So, Paul, I'm going to pick on you first. And are you having these conversations with people, and are they saying, yeah, you know what, from a C-suite perspective, if you're talking with a CEO and they're looking for a DevOps person versus if you're talking with a manager level person, are you seeing that they're looking for different things? Is there any consistency in what these companies are looking for?
Yeah, that's a good question. And as I look at the data on this slide, it brings to mind kind of the evolution of a discussion that we have with a customer from when they initially engage us to start a DevOps search to ultimately like where the conversation evolves to over the course of time. It's not uncommon for us to start with a search that is so technology driven, where the specific automation tool or containerization technology just is at the forefront, and the notion of soft skills or the ability to effectively collaborate or cross-functional ability, you know, is really in the back burner. But, you know, then you see this response, you know, this data, and, you know, the specific automation tools, you know, carry less weight than just someone that has broad-based experience in automation in general, like someone that can use a little to do a lot. And, you know, and also I just think based on the statistics that I was referencing, if you're so tool specific in this search and you're inflexible in terms of, you know, which DevOps tools you need in order for someone to be considered for your role, then I think you're missing the bigger picture, which is that, you know, you can have someone with every technology that you need, but then, you know, they're not a cultural fit for what your organization might be trying to accomplish with DevOps, because DevOps in and of itself means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but very often it just embodies a cultural shift within an organization that's trying to break down silos within the IT org, you know, and try to get more cross collaboration, communication between those groups, so we can just release software and applications faster. And so, you know, I think that the recommendation that we're always giving is you got to hire for ability and for what you think someone's ceiling would be and their growth potential and their ability to learn and collaborate and communicate effectively and be empathetic, as opposed to, does this person check every box as it relates to specific automation tool set or what, you know, container technology that we're using today.
Very interesting. Excellent. All right. Topo, I'm going to turn to you now, and I'm going to ask you, as you're looking at the ecosystem out there, what are you seeing as far as when you're a distinguished engineer and you're trying to bring people onto the team? When you're looking for people, what are you looking for, and how are you growing people in the organization to help map to these different pieces?
Right, and again, this is very interesting statistics, and there are some patterns here that I can see. But overall, you know, just to give you a little background about the whole distinguished engineer family, which was kind of not there a few years ago in big enterprises, other than, you know, software engineering organizations, but they're coming in now. The idea of individual contributor or distinguished engineers are not really heads down coding and, you know, shipping the code out, but also play a bigger role within the enterprise. I mean, the senior leadership looks at distinguished engineer or individual contributors at a higher level to not only influence the company's strategic direction in terms of technology, but also mentoring people at a lower level and how to bring them up, and making sure the skill level is kind of broadcasted along across the enterprise and maybe even externally. So those things are coming in. So gone are the days where individual contributors meant actually heads down coding and shipping code to a different kind of area where you not only need functional knowledge, but also, of course, you need technical knowledge. And it's not about tools or technologies, it's kind of breadth of things that you need to gather to function in this area. But also you need a lot of soft skill. And why that is important is because, as I said, it's not heads down coding anymore. It's actually influencing people. And when you try to influence people, you need a lot of soft skill in terms of listening, communication, making a concise statement and not confusing people. So, there's a saying called, if you cannot convince, confuse. That doesn't really work here. So with that regards, when I'm looking at individual contributors getting into CapitalOne, I'm actually looking at soft skill and then technical skill, and then any kind of vertical silos or a tool specific thing or a technology specific thing very deep in. So it's like a combination of the whole thing. I'm not going to recommend somebody to hire at CapitalOne with just one of those.
There we go. All right. I think it was Jayne who actually kicked it over the final. She gave the extra push that we needed to help your lights come back on. Wonderful. All right. Thank you, Topo. Sacha, do you have any thoughts on this slide as far as an employer, somebody who's looking at people, somebody who's in the market already and talking with customers who are looking to hire people? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, first, I'm happy to see automation skills as being high for C persons, right? Because a few years back, you would never ask for automation. Why automation rather than something else? And it really has to be pushed from the top. It really has to be backed from the top. So it's great to see that as an important aspect. Soft skills, obviously, we see it every day, right? The technology we're using, you feel like you know what it's about, and you're already it's already yesterday's news, right? So you need to constantly evolve and challenge yourself. And so being able to do change management creates a narrative about why it's needed to change. It can be frustrating. So this change management needs to be done very, very well. And so from an individual contributor standpoint now, I think we all want to hire the unicorns, right? We come with a long list of criteria. This person needs to do all of this, but the reality is, as Paul just showed before, right? You won't find on that market the unicorn you're looking for. Paul was talking about abilities, and I think this is really the key aspect. You need to find people who are smart, raw smartness, and who are willing to learn, who are willing to adapt, right? Adaptability is very important. If you're willing to adapt and you don't fear change, then sky is the limit. And I think actually right now on the market, a lot of people are afraid because they see DevOps coming, they see a new wave of doing things. They've been saying IT ops for a while, and maybe those jobs are going to have to adapt, right? So I see this as an amazing opportunity to relearn and become good at the different job. I am impressed by the number of companies that I'm seeing which are willing to retrain people and spend the money to train people. That's amazing because they're smart. So let's do it together.
Yeah, and they have so much good context already. Max, can we go to the next slide? They have so much good context already around the business and that alignment with what at the end of the day, what's the widget we want to ship and what's the value we want to deliver. Help, people who already understand the mission, helping them do better in this avenue. And I think this is something that Jayne I'll have you start on this slide, but this helps to sort of explain why these different types of skills are needed. And so Jayne, can I ask you to sort of dive into this slide? When you're trying to find or upskill the full stack engineer, what does that mean? Is that really a unicorn and you can't find them? It sounds like it is.
So as Topo knows, there's a little bit of intellectual property coming out soon about the full stack engineer. He and I were very privileged to be involved in some work recently. I wasn't on that project, but I think there's some really good information about it. But you know, we hear a lot about
IT forum, the IT
yeah,
Rev
part of the forum. Yeah, one of the forum papers is going to be about full stack. So
Great.
let me talk about T-shaping first, and then we can talk about the full stack engineer. So, you know, I've been in IT a lot longer than maybe some folks. I'm not going to say how long, but it's been a while. And so we grew IT up kind of like a trunk of a tree, right? So the tree grew up and the branches grew and the specialties grew and the technologies grew. And so we actually groomed IT professionals to self-identify by their specialty. I'm a software engineer, I'm a QA engineer, I'm an infrastructure engineer, I'm a support person.
Database,
and so
network.
I'm a DBA, I mean, you know, systems admin. And that was how we marketed ourselves. That's how we grew ourselves. And we put our heads down and we grew our specialty. And so we are now an organization of specialists. And that's great. But today that doesn't really work. So today being a specialist is awesome. That's the stem of your T. And we want you to continue to groom that. But today's highly desirable professional is what we call T-shaped. Right? So you want to still have your specialty, but you want to supplement it with a broad range of other skills. So if you're a software engineer, you want to be a test-driven software engineer. So you need to understand a little bit about testing. You need to understand security because we're going to shift a lot of that responsibility to the left. So testing starts at the first line of code. You want to groom your softer human skills, right? So that you're a better collaborator. And now there's so much advocacy about self-organization or self-organizing teams that you have to become a better collaborator. So those go into the top of your T. Do you need to be a QA engineer? No. Do you need to know enough about testing, coding, infrastructure, fill in any of the blanks to fill the top of your T? Yes. And until recently, we really didn't encourage IT professionals to do that, right? So the full stack engineer is not only a full stack technology engineer, and I know that's the belief that we're going to find engineers that can do it all, right? Lock them in a room and somewhere along the way, software gets deployed more frequently, faster, right? And, you know, they're the, you know, they're the folks.
Just need to hire Brent and then you're all set.
Yeah, but the reality is what we want more than anything else is a whole group of T-shaped people, right? People that really can speak the same language, that can support each other, that can shift a lot of activities to the left. So I'll end, I always describe it this way. My daughter's an artist. She's a painter. And she'll tell you she needs to know a little bit about clay or metal or fabric or other mediums to bring her painting alive, right? That's a T-shaped artist. So we need to be able to take that same craft approach to software engineering, where we have software engineers that know just enough about a whole lot of other disciplines in order to bring their art alive.
Fantastic. So let me ask, I'm going to turn to Sacha, and I'm going to sort of ask, what types of things does CloudBees do to help people get that broad knowledge? Are there any shows or products or technology that we allow folks to download and use for free or to access for free? What types of stuff does CloudBees do to help this breadth of knowledge in the community, Sacha?
So first, we've seen people move from department to department. Some people are really curious and want to change job. I think we need to let that happen. It's really positive. But then it's a usual set of things you need to enable, right? You want people to attend conferences, to meet with people, you actually create a lot of empathy for users and customers in doing so. We also offer a number of online training capabilities so that people who have this curiosity again, but it goes back to this notion of adaptability and desire to learn, right? So people who want to do it will do it. So I think there is a range portfolio of things. Also, one that we don't talk enough about, I think, but we're increasingly seeing this, is contributing to open source. If you ask developers, what do you want to do? What matters to you? They want to have an impact, right? And so open source is one way to have an impact. Either you have an impact on the product you're developing. Sometimes it's possible, right? Maybe you're developing the website for a great event and you will say that part I did it, right? But a lot of of developers won't have this ability, and yet they want to have an impact. So contributing to open source is also an amazing way to do that. At CloudBees, we have obviously a lot of people contributing to open source. We also participate in the Continuous Delivery Foundation that we helped create a few months ago. And it's amazing to see that a number of companies are now part of the Continuous Delivery Foundation, right? CapitalOne is one of them. You will find Autodesk and so on, but it's an amazing way to funnel a lot of that positive energy and make people proud to join a company.
Yeah, I mean, 85% of the commits for the Jenkins open source project are supported by CloudBees, right? So the code base is evolving in a large part thanks to the efforts that we're doing in this company, and that makes our engineers pretty happy, right? That they have
I hope so.
software, right, that is being used by millions of people all over the world to deliver this software to people. So that's fantastic. Topo, you have a similar story about sort of open source and that culture inside of CapOne. What are you doing to help cultivate that breadth of knowledge inside of CapitalOne and outside of CapitalOne?
Right. So inside CapitalOne, we are open source first company, meaning that if I am building something or using something or looking at some solution, the first thing I would be looking at is open source world. Now, I'm not saying that it has to be like open source free. I'm talking about the source code is free, not the service. Service may be, there's a price point, but the source code should be open in the world. So that's first. And with that comes some sort of responsibility in allowing your developers to contribute to open source, because most of the time you'll find open source solution or tools or things that you need to maybe tweak a little bit for you and then contribute back to the open source so that others can use it and you don't get stuck in time with a specific version. So that's that. And then we also have our own open source products. But going back to what Sacha was saying a little while ago, is these days, if you look at the whole hiring process, at least myself, I do not actually look at a resume that has been submitted to our HR systems for interviewing people. I actually look at their GitHub repositories. So it is very, very important that you have a presence in open so that people actually can see your work and not have to read a page of resume and then kind of make a judgment call. So as I said, I look at their LinkedIn, their connections, their contributions externally, and their GitHub code repositories to find out if I really want to talk to that person further.
Very interesting. So it comes back to, I think, another thing that Sacha had talked about, which is making sure that you're adapting and you're trying new things. If there's one thing I've learned is that you can't be good at everything, and you're definitely not good at it the first time you try it. The only way to get better at it is to do it. And so I love the fact that you're sort of saying, Topo, have work out there for people to look at. And if it's no good, then make it better. Gene Kim has a great quote where he says, the quality of the daily work is less important than the improvement in the quality of the daily work. And I think as an employer, if you can see a trajectory of improvement, especially self-initiated improvement from a candidate, that speaks volumes, as opposed to somebody who's at the top of their game, but they're not trying to grow, they're not trying to learn. I'm the best I-shaped person out there, may not be the right person to hire, because maybe they're not going to be growing and giving you that broad, knowledge. Paul, tell me about finding the full stack engineer. Is this easy? Something that Robert Half can help all of your clients with? When they call you, it's like handled?
So I wish I could say yes, but that wouldn't be accurate. And Topo and I, Topo and I were laughing about this in our initial intro call, just kind of the definitional notion of a full stack engineer. And when I think about the interviews that we set up for our candidates with customers, and the amount of times that an interview is conducted and the client comes back and says, well, this person isn't exactly what we thought they were or what we were looking for, I'd say that disconnect is the greatest in full stack engineer searches, just because the client maybe has an unrealistic expectation of exactly what they're getting, or someone has sold themselves or branded themselves as a full stack engineer or developer, which is a very common term that you see on resumes all over, various different platforms today. And, my definition is, if you say you're full stack, then, my hope is that you would be able to do new feature development in any tier of the development stack standalone, where you wouldn't need, extensive handholding or someone kind of looking over your shoulder or checking your work continuously just to make sure that you were on the right track. And there's a lot of candidates that have some exposure to tiers of the application stack and have dabbled and have worked, maybe on teams of people where, they have an experience that would lead them to want to brand themselves as a full stack engineer, but then ultimately when they interview, it turns out they're more middle tier back end or they're more kind of middle tier front end or front end specific. And so, I think that being able to demonstrate that you've actually put time into developing your skill set and that you can show that progression, Sam, that you just referenced, whether it's through GitHub or whatever it is that you're using to demonstrate that, I take this seriously and, I just don't occasionally collaborate with another team that's, outside of my core functional area, and therefore I'm quote unquote a full stack engineer, but this is how I've applied myself. These are the resources that I'm using. This is the training that I've pursued. These are the groups that I'm interacting with outside of the office. And so, yes, my core functional work has been in middle tier server side, .NET development, but here's how I've applied myself, and put in the extra effort so that when I say I'm a full stack engineer, I actually have a bit more credibility. And I also think that when a client comes to us and says that this is truly what they're looking for, and then we dig in to the requirement to a greater degree, we find out that more often than not, the client doesn't actually need a full stack engineer. They just like the sound of that, and they like the potential cost savings of a full stack engineer when they think about consolidating, what could be 2 or 3 headcounts into one individual and only paying kind of one base salary for what potentially they should be paying.
But isn't that at the heart of the problem, right? Isn't that at the heart of the problem where people want, I see this a lot in marketing too, people want to get a senior demand gen person who can do everything, all of the demand gen, instead of hiring somebody who's going to be good at all the different roles that are part of that demand gen thing. You can't find, yes, maybe you can find the perfect person who can do all that, but if you're an organization that can find 2 or 3 people who might be newer, maybe not as expensive, and that they're able to learn and you can grow them to handle each part of those stacks. They still have a broad knowledge, but they've got a specialty as part of one of those stacks. And that is a powerful position to be in as well if you can find those people.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and I'll ask this of Sacha, because I think there's also another interesting model out here is growth by acquisition. So if you're acquiring and integrating folks from different organizations into a central organization, first of all, adaptability, and CloudBees I know has done some acquisitions recently, but I'm sure many others are doing that as well. And so if you don't have adaptable, T-shaped, willing to learn folks, then that integration is not going to be easy. And in fact, some of the people that might have been really great candidates to be kept on may not, just because they've got their heads down into this is what I do, this is the company I work for, this is my skill, and that's not why the acquisition was made in the first place.
Yeah, the other point is that in that full stack, I think somebody needs to define what that full stack is. Where does it start? Where does it end? Because I don't think that anybody is talking about a full stack engineer today who can go all the way to the server and the box level or the metal level, right? So somebody needs to define when they say I want a full stack engineer, but the stack starts here and stops here. Then maybe there is a better definition of full stack. Other than that, it's just a name.
Yeah.
Sacha, did you want to have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's slightly adjacent, but you know, the things I've learned the hard way is that sometimes you want to protect when you do integration acquisition, you want to protect and shield people for a while, right? You don't want to disrupt too much by fear of disruption, and you postpone a lot of that integration work, but it never is good. It only creates a bigger issue, and so that reinforces what we were just saying, right? People who are more adaptable, who can recognize a new normal and adapt to it, will be successful. The other ones, I think it's harder because you self-create a lot of frustration that's not related to any real issue per se, right? It's just a new situation, and some people handle that better than others. But it's yeah, it's there. You can see
Yeah,
who is
and
really adaptable.
that broad general knowledge means that you're able to dip your hand in or your toe into multiple different areas, and again, experiment there, not be afraid of making a mistake. My cheese was moved. Instead of my cheese being moved, I say that my honey pot was moved because I'm joining the CloudBees team, right? But figuring out where I can fit in and where I can provide value is an important part of that whole process. And I have to say, it's been a pleasure to become onboarded into the hive. I mean, there's a lot of great culture inside of CloudBees, and that makes people want to invest more. And the fact that I'm able to go and do things and make mistakes and I don't get my hand slapped for it, people are forgiving and understanding of the fact that I'm bumping into things. These are all the types of things that allow people to broaden their overall knowledge and then be able to specialize once they found something that's really useful to them. Hey,
Yeah,
Max,
thanks, Sam. And I just want to say one thing as part of the broad, being a generalist, essentially having this broad general knowledge, I think the soft skills are very important, right? It's part of the knowledge, and being self-aware, starting to develop this self-awareness is also very important. And I guess we're going to talk about that in a minute, but it's very important. So
yeah, Max, can we go to that next slide? Actually, that's a perfect segue. Sacha, it's like you've done this before. So getting to that success point, human skills, how should people be approaching that? What types of things are available to them to learn those soft and human skills? When somebody asks, you know, when somebody says, I have great soft human skills, what do they really mean? Paul, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. And so, you know, when I was thinking about this question, you know, part of what came to mind was the way that we reference check individuals, which I know is, you know, an organization specific thing, you know, whether people are able to actually give reference data. But I think when you think about who's the individual that I would want to speak to that would be able to articulate this developer or operations person's experience with soft or human skills, you know, maybe if they haven't listed this individual as someone that you could speak to, you know, you could just ask a candidate as part of your interview process if you could talk to someone that was part of the PMO for the organization that they worked for most recently that could speak to how collaborative they were or communicative or empathetic in a scenario where, you know, they were under a tight timeline and, you know, and trying to release something and they really needed to kind of think outside the box. You know, often I think the tendency is to give the person that, you know, will speak to whatever skill set is your core competency, or a person that just knows you and is going to say the nicest things about you, right? But that might be a way to try to just understand a bit more about how this person actually works in a non-siloed environment where, you know, maybe things are a bit more chaotic and agile and the pressure is up because the release cycle is rapid. So, you know, that would be one recommendation. Then the other piece is, I think, you just fundamentally reevaluating your entire interview process, whereby, you know, you're asking different questions or you're just dedicating more time to the kind of the soft skills or the kind of the maybe the qualitative component of an individual's experience, as opposed to, you know, grabbing the marker and, you know, putting someone on the whiteboard where they've got to write an automation script for whatever it is they're trying to create. You know, we ask them a situational question where, like, you know, let's say hypothetically, you know, this is the task that you were trying to automate. This was the person you needed to work with cross-functionally. This was the issue that was recurring. you know, how would you handle this? Like, what are some ways you've handled this in the past? So, you know, we're kind of deviating from, let's go through this checklist and say, you know, have you done this, or what have you specifically done with this, and think more situationally, you know, how would this person handle a real world scenario?
Excellent, and I like making it concrete for people as part of that process, because like you said, hey, code me you know, some script to do something. That's concrete. That's easy for someone to wrap their hands around. But if you just say, tell me about your soft skills, it's kind of tough. You need that example, so that's helpful. Yep. Sacha, you brought up the topic of soft skills, so I'll point to you next. Where are you finding places where people are getting some help with these soft skills opportunities? Where some of the places where CloudBees actually helps our own employees with these things, or helping the community with these things? Anything along those lines you wanted to share?
We do HBDI. So that's a test, you know, that can help figure out what type of personality you are. It's not that HBDI is the answer to everything. It's just that it's a good way to have a discussion on what type of personality you are, and within the team, what's the result from a team standpoint in terms of personality, right? The combined result. Are you a team that maybe lack some special soft skill, and maybe you need to hire for that skill or develop that skill, right?
Sacha, I'm not sure people know what HBDI is. Can maybe give them a 2-second on what it is?
Yeah, HBDI is a test you go through, and that will put you in 4 quadrants. Some is more around the personal skills and you know, your social skills. Another one is more about the big picture, or how organized, structured you are, and so on. And so it's not so much, you know, can you get a 20 out of 20 on that scale? It just divides 100% based on those 4 things. So you're never bad at something, you're more shaped one way or the other. And it tells you when you're going to face a situation, what are you likely going to how are you going to react to that problem, right? More in a structured way, and you take you start analyzing things, or more in an emotional way, and so on. So there is no bad answer, it just says who you are. And it gives you an answer along 2 scenarios. One is, how would you react normally, and under stress, right? So you can see how you stress. Do you pull an Excel spreadsheet when you stress and try to solve it this way? So it's a good way to talk about soft skills within the team. I'm sure you can use tons of other tools to do that. And I personally think that managers have a big role to play in developing this self-awareness on soft skills, because it's you know, it's hard to, it's probably the hardest thing you can develop, right? Because it touches your own ego. What I tend to see is that with individual contributors, sometimes you might need to just not ignore, but have less requirement when it comes to soft skill, because sometimes high quality in terms of expertise, technical expertise, might come at a cost in terms of soft skill. However, managers can't have that luxury, quote unquote, right? They need to be sure to have those soft skills. And from that standpoint, what is also a word of caution is when you promote people, right? Because when you hire people, you tend to validate that the soft skills are here. And when you promote, you've seen the great things that person have done. So you're going to promote as a new manager without necessarily going through the right training. And that's when you might face issue in somebody being good, but not have the right soft skill. And that creates a conflict within the organization. So a word of caution here.
Right. Yeah. The Peter principle, being promoted to your point of least usefulness, which is, yeah, I won't make no comments about myself on that. All right. Next, let's see, Jayne, what are your thoughts on the soft skills, and what is DOI doing to help people in that regard? You are muted.
Now I'm not muted. So sometimes I think we assume that people are going to grow their soft skills by themselves, and that it's something that I'm going to, you know, they're a nice person, they're a quiet person, and we describe people according to their outward characteristics. I love the idea that CloudBees uses as an instrument to help people have some self-awareness. I also think it helps not only self-awareness, but awareness of your colleagues. So for example, you know, the difference between an extrovert and an introvert isn't, you know, Sam, I would sort of guess you're an extrovert, I'm an extrovert, but it isn't because we're talkative or we're friendly, it's how you charge your batteries, right? So I know I charge my batteries around other people. Some people may need to charge their batteries by themselves. So being aware of your own soft skills, your own personality traits, but also respecting and understanding other people's approach. Some people want you to ask about the family, other people want you to get right to the topic. And so part of your soft skills evolution is, again, being self-aware, but also being respectful and aware of other people's skills. We just recently published an ebook on cultural resilience, on how to be culturally resilient, so that with a lot of change happening very quickly, I didn't write it. A woman by the name of Karen Ferris, who's a very well-known organizational change management, we're calling her now a DevOps culturalist, wrote the ebook, just published this week on our website. It's free to download, but it really does give some tips on how to be culturally resilient in an environment of change, so that you can take some steps for yourself in terms of how you can not only grow your soft skills, but how you can be more adaptive to situations around you, particularly, again, where it's a very, very dynamic environment. There's lots of other tools out there. There are tools out there to help you manage conflict, to understand what your go-to approach is on managing conflict and how to perhaps take some other approaches. I mean, there's a lot of good resources out there that actually we've included in some of our content, just to be able to help people understand that this isn't something, A, you should ignore, or B, that you're out there by yourself and that there isn't knowledge and education available to you.
Excellent. I love that. I'm interested in reading that ebook. That sounds very, very interesting. Topo. Yeah, Topo, thoughts on soft skills?
So soft skill, I think I heard in this panel before that the managers may need more soft skills and individual contributor may need a lesser amount. But I think from my perspective, what I've seen is that it's different kind of soft skills that you need being a manager versus being an individual contributor. I mean, I'll give you an example. At the same level, let's say you have a manager and an individual contributor. Now, manager has people working for that person. Individual contributors do not have people working for him or her. Now, think about a situation when you have some work to be done. Manager can tell the people who are reporting to that him or her to actually do the work and get the work done. From an individual contributor perspective, you actually have to influence and convince other people to work on your ideas without a direct reporting relationship, which requires a different kind of soft skill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, beg and borrow and steal whatever you can on top of that. But beyond that, as I was saying in the beginning, that as an individual contributor, enterprises now look at a distinguished engineer community to actually influence the company strategy, which basically means something beyond coding or hands-on deploying a microservice on an AWS ECS container cluster and all these things. But it's about convincing and telling a story and communicating and listening to the actual problems and understanding the business needs to kind of contribute to that business strategy for the enterprise. So it kind of needs a almost same amount of soft skill, maybe a different side of that soft skill.
Awesome. I love that. Max, can you go to the next slide for me? And we're going to probably not stay on this one very long. We'll bring up the topic and I'll talk about what are some ways that folks have found good to recruit people, or what are some things that are good to do when you want to get recruited. I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide while we're talking through it, because part of, I think, the answers to some of those questions will be some of the events and things that are highlighted on that next slide. So if you could go to the next slide now, Max, and then I will, for this last one, Topo, I'm going to start with you as far as hiring.
Yes. So as CapitalOne, we are always looking for highly technical people with a lot of soft skill, because we believe that to be successful within CapitalOne, you need to be a good human being and then a good technologist. And we are always looking for people like you. So we are not necessarily looking for full stack engineers, because we kind of know they don't exist. Even they do exist, somebody already have taken them. So deal with it. So we are actually looking for a good human being and a good technical skill people to join us, and we are always open. So come join us. But other than that, the message is clear that we are kind of in the forefront. We are supporting foundations, open source projects, open source products, and different conferences that are more open than others to actually bring out the message that we are with you and we support you and we need you too.
And a lot of what you guys, one of the reasons, Topo, I believe that you got involved in speaking at some of these conferences, like the DevOps Enterprise Summit, which Electric Cloud was a founding partner of. CloudBees will be there this year, both in the UK and in the US. So we're excited to see everybody at those shows. One of the reasons, Topo, I think that you go to those shows in the first place was to be able to get CapitalOne's name out there as a high-performing DevOps organization, because guess what? Engineers want to work at high-performing DevOps organizations. They don't want to work at organizations where it takes 18 months to get software out, because why would you want to do that, right? So that's fantastic. Paul, I'm sure you have some interesting insights on this, and if we need to run a few minutes longer, I think we can. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Paul.
Sure. And so specific, just for a moment, talking to the slide previously, which ties into my response here, is, when we're talking about upscaling your current staff, I mean, if you're concerned about soft skills, what better individual to move into your DevOps specific role than an individual that you've seen in action as it relates to their soft skills, versus the person that's maybe told you a lot of what you want to hear in an interview, but you don't have a huge amount of real world experience with. And so, when we're thinking about how do we go out and find these people, it's like, I liked seeing that reflected in the statistics that a lot of organizations are grooming these people from within the company, because I just think there's so much more of a known entity, and the amount of risk is minimized significantly. But what I recommend to organizations that are looking to attract the best talent in this regard is first and foremost, be able to clearly articulate what DevOps means to you, like articulate your vision. It's a nebulous concept, so you want to make sure that you're being very specific with candidates that have a lot of options about what DevOps means to you, what you're using it for, where you are in the life cycle, of establishing that as kind of your ethos, so to speak, within your IT organization. And then, think outside of the box in terms of the types of people that you're looking for, which is a topic that's come up a variety of times in this conversation. But, I think you've got to start with really strong foundational skills in either systems administration or development, but then look, quickly beyond that to who's the individual with kind of the most broad-based technology background above and beyond their discipline, and how has this person kind of found ways to diversify that skill set. Essentially, how have they built skills in their current role for the job that they want to do?
Yeah, that's great. How they've evolved themselves as the market has changed. Because if you're an animal that can't evolve, you will be extinct pretty soon. Glenn O'Donnell said that at DOES 2014. He says if you have the word administrator in your title, you should be looking for you reskill yourself, right? Jayne, what are your thoughts?
So, I mean, just wrapping up, when we looked at the roles that were being hired in the report, and again, we didn't have a chance to share that, DevOps engineer, number one, even though we don't have any type of agreement on what a DevOps engineer actually is or isn't, now full stack engineer, so we've evolved the term. But that was number one. But the other interesting role that was being hired is DevOps coach. And I thought that was really fascinating, right? That organizations, even though they're grooming people from within, are actively looking to hire coaches, kind of that dojo approach, but hiring coaches that can help people kind of transform to a new way of working. So that was fascinating. I do think if you're on the operations side, look at site reliability engineering. I think if you're on the development or infrastructure side, you're right. It's either grow or be extinct. And I think hopefully some of the data, I mentioned to you, Sam, we're excited that at DevOps World we'll announce the opening of the survey for 2020's report. So this will be a year-over-year event. And so we took a benchmark in 2019, and now we'll start to take it year over year to see what stays the same, what changes, what's new. And so hopefully we'll be able to provide a little bit of data that, just give people a path. Or at least some inspiration in terms of what they should be looking at. And hopefully that gets them hired or promoted.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I'm looking forward to see how that how the trend line is going on that.
Yeah, we're excited. Evelyn's all in working on the survey right now, so that's exciting.
Wonderful. Sacha, last but not least, bring us home. What do you got for us?
Well, when you hire qualified people, you know, the recruitment goes both sides, right? You qualify the person as much as the person qualifies you. It's a great way to expose who you are, how you work, your diversity. Diversity is very important as well. And so that contributes to your brand. Who are you? And what's the experience? And so from that standpoint, anything you can do to really expose the real team that's going to be welcoming that new person is the best way you can be very candid with people on what your true culture and how you are. And on that front, you know, I want to say CapitalOne was a company that very early on participated to conferences, had booths, was very modern from the get-go in making this happen. I remember at Jenkins World years ago, CapitalOne being present. So conferences are an amazing way to also show your company in a different way outside of the closed office, but show what you do through presentation, through expertise and talented people. So it's an amazing way to recruit.
Fantastic. Yeah. And as you'll see from the slide here, there are a lot of opportunities for people to go and network with folks who are already very familiar with this. A lot of opportunities to go for free events as well. Things like the Jenkins area meetups where you can go and talk about automation and learn about these things. So if there are, you know, there's online training. If you go to the CloudBees website, there's CloudBees University. The DevOps Institute has lots of trainings that they provide at conferences. CapitalOne has the tools and the functions that they provide, Hygia, to the community that you can go and download as open source. You know, Sacha was mentioning the Jenkins open source project, the CDF open source initiative that we've helped to spearhead. So there are a lot of ways for folks who are on the line to go out and get access to free tools. There are a lot of paid conferences that they can join as well. And there are some that are really nearby you as well. CloudBees Days is an event series that we're doing, very, very low barrier to entry from a cost perspective, but amazing community, fantastic workshops, opportunities for people to learn. No one expects you to be perfect from the get-go, but the drive to learn more, the drive to get better, those are, I'm speaking for the whole panel, but those I think are very important for hiring managers. So I want to really thank Jayne for the work that she did on this survey to help shine a light on it. I'd like to thank the panelists for joining us on this conversation. This was amazing. And thank you to all of you who joined to hear about how we're minding the gaps and upskilling the humans of DevOps. Very interested in hearing what you guys are doing as well. So there'll be a blog post on this coming out. Feel free to mention whatever you're doing as well. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks, everybody. Max, I'll hand it over to you.
One last wave.
One last wave.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm closing this out. That survey is going to come right up. If you could answer that, it just takes about 1 minute. We'd really appreciate it. And there are a lot of great questions got asked. We're going to answer them all in the blog post. So we'll talk to you again real soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.